What's going on, guys? It is Bearston back again with another movie ranking. I can't believe it. I've uploaded like 5 or 6 days in a row now, but today we are going to be listing all the Rocky/Creed movies from worst to best. Feel free to leave your list down below, but let's get right into it. Coming in at our 8th or last place spot, I have Rocky 5. Now, I feel like people who have watched these movies, it's kind of a known fact that this is the worst one. Personally, I even like this one, but it's really not very good. This is really the only movie that doesn't have Rocky actually fight in a real boxing match. Rather, he fights at the end of the movie with our last fight in a street fight against his protege, who is actually named Tommy Gunn. Yes, it definitely has not aged well. You can see where it has some cheesiness to it, but if you're watching this movie, or any of these movies as a matter of fact, expecting no cheesiness, well, you're going to be kind of disappointed because each movie has a little bit of it in there. But the reason why I personally do not like this movie, and it's kind of the reason why I don't like our bottom two in general, is because Rocky doesn't feel like his true self. He doesn't feel like his actual protagonist ways, where he's the underdog. He kind of is like a jerk in this movie, in my opinion. He really doesn't treat his kid very well. Like, he has some moments where he's like, oh yeah, he's a good father, but then he has other moments where it's like, Rocky, what are you thinking? And it's really hard to root for him at the end of the day when you have all these other movies where he plays this underdog character so well. But in this movie, again, he just kind of comes off as a little bit of a bad father, and I personally do not like that, let alone this is definitely the worst fight out of any of the movies. Tommy Gunn is not the best antagonist for any of these movies, so that is why I have it in my last place spot. Coming in at our next to last place spot, though, I have Rocky 3. And again, why this is lower on my list is because I feel like Rocky is not his usual underdog protagonist self. This movie takes place literally right after the end of Rocky 2, where Rocky beats Apollo Creed and he becomes world champion. So he's world champion, and then he's fighting all of these younger fighters who are up-and-comer, but they're really not a match for Rocky, and Rocky beats them easily. And then he comes and fights Mr. T. His real name is Clubber Lang in this movie. I actually had to look it up because, to me, this movie is the movie where Rocky fights Mr. T. But Mr. T, again, is this up-and-comer, and he really kind of plays the role of the Rocky-type figure, even though he's kind of a jerk, but he's the one who trains underground, and he is an up-and-comer, to where Rocky in this movie plays almost the role as Apollo Creed does in the first two, where he's the world champion. He's cocky, he's shooting commercials, he's getting all these big money deals, he's become wealthy, and he's gotten used to it. So then when he takes this fight against Clubber Lang, he hasn't trained as hard. His trainer Mickey dies right before the fight, which is a very emotional in the movie, but he loses the first fight, and I really don't care for our fighters losing the first fight just to come back and fight again later on in the movie, which he does, and he comes back and he's able to beat Mr. T in the second fight. But again, ultimately I don't care for it because he doesn't feel like Rocky. He feels like a champion, but he's not an underdog, which is where I feel like most of the appeal comes from in these movies. So that is why it's in my next to last place spot. Coming in at number 6, now this might be an unpopular opinion, but I have Rocky 4. And a lot of people have this movie really high on their list, but this movie really doesn't do it for me. Now, this is probably the movie where Rocky is the best he has ever been. He's the best boxer. He's in the best shape. But it's super over the top in my opinion, and I think that's what it's going for, but it really shows that it's a product of its time. This movie is super 80s. It is pretty much just almost, it looks like a political statement where Russia's the bad guys because you have Drago, and Drago fights Apollo Creed in the movie. And he kills Apollo Creed in the fight. That's how strong he is. Again, I feel like this is probably Rocky's most fearsome competitor, him or Clubber Lang. But he kills Apollo Creed, where you have one of the most iconic lines in Rocky, where he's like, if he dies, he dies. And it just cracks you up at the end of the day. But it's really hard because of the cheesiness, because of how 80s this movie is. It's really hard for me to take it seriously when the first time I watched this movie was in the 2010s. It just doesn't aged super well. It is really fun to watch, though. I think it might honestly be the shortest Rocky movie, just kind of coming in right at around an hour and a half. But it's good fun. I think all these movies are good fun. But when it comes to how actually good this movie is objectively, I think it is one of the weaker ones. So I have it at number 6. Coming in at number 5, though, I have Rocky Balboa. Now, this might be a little bit of an unpopular opinion, especially because I've already had Rocky 4 on this list, but I feel like Rocky Balboa is an extremely underrated movie. Now, this movie came out in 2006, so this pretty much tells the story of Rocky post-boxing and as he has entered into retirement. This movie shows pretty much Rocky owning his restaurant that we see in the Creed movies, and it tells his story of how he's adjusting into real, everyday life. But he gets challenged by the world champion at this time via simulation, because the simulation says Rocky would win. But Rocky goes and fights this world champion, and he loses, obviously, because he's like 60 years old, but he puts up a good fight. But the reason why I have this movie up so high is because I feel like this movie shows what Rocky 5 was trying to do, where it shows Rocky kind of struggling in his ways of fatherhood. This movie does it exactly right, because Rocky, yes, does struggle, but he reaches out to his son because he loves his son, but his son is kind of hesitant because of his past mistakes that Rocky has had in fatherhood. But Rocky is trying in this movie, and I think that is where this movie really shines. And also, they got Milo Ventimiglia to play Rocky's son. I really like him as an actor. He's in This Is Us. Phenomenal actor. But yeah, I have this movie at number 5. Coming in at our number 4 spot, I have Rocky 2. And now most lists I look at, they actually have this movie closer towards the bottom of their list. But I feel like this movie is a very strong outing in the Rocky series. Now, I do understand where their complaints come from, where the beginning of the movie and even in towards the middle acts are kind of slower. But I still feel like it tells the story of Rocky and how he's an underdog. And after that first fight, he really doesn't want to fight anymore, because he really took some serious blows and it almost injured him, almost making him lose his sight. So he's still a rootable character. But then he still musters up the courage. It's not really like he lacked the courage, but he finds the will to fight, and he fights Apollo Creed again. But this time in Rocky 2, he beats him. And in Rocky 2, I feel like this personally, in my opinion, is the best ending boxing fight out of the whole series. It's just an epic way to finish, where Rocky stays toe-to-toe with Apollo throughout the fight, and then they both knock each other down there at the very end of the fight, but Rocky gets up at the last second. It's just a perfect end to a pretty good movie, so I feel like that's why it has to come in a higher spot, and I have it at number 4. Coming in at our number 3 spot, I have Creed 2. Now, this movie is probably the most epic out of the entire Rocky series, because while the Rocky series sometimes seems a little cheesy and campy, this movie has the 2010 visuals and storytelling, and rather than coming off as cheesy and campy, it just comes super over the top and epic. And I love how this movie takes one of the cheesiest movies in Rocky 4 and implements it, and that is a large part of the storytelling in this movie. We get introduced back to Drago and Drago's son, who just seems to be like this unbeatable force. He's pretty much a beast. And in the first time Creed, and as he faces Drago in that first fight, he wins, but he wins via disqualification because Drago hits him while he's down and pretty much beats him within an inch of his life. But because of this, and the reality is like, hey, I did win, but I pretty much lost in all reality. So because of this, Creed kind of learns how to handle himself better as a champion and as a fighter, and he has that work mentality that I feel like he kind of was missing throughout the rest of the movie, and he is able to work hard like his mentor Rocky to come back and beat Drago in the second fight and retain his championship. So that is why I have it at my number 3 spot. Coming in at our number 2 spot, I have Creed. Now, this may seem a little blasphemous, but I honestly really debated putting this movie at our number 1 spot. pretty much because I'm a sucker for good visuals. And because this movie came out more recent than our number one spot, by a good margin, obviously it has better visuals. But at the end of the day, great visuals doesn't really make a movie better per se. This movie still does have really good writing, really good character building, and really good acting at the end of the day, which is why it is at our number 2 spot. I really like the story it tells, with Creed really trying to find his place in the boxing world. He goes out to find his trainer and his mentor, Rocky, and Rocky, of course, gets sick right as he does this, but Creed stays by his side throughout his training, and he ultimately ends up losing his fight at the end of the movie. But again, much like the first Rocky movie, he is able to stand toe-to-toe with the champion and pretty much make a split decision, and nobody really thought he could do that, which is almost a victory in and of itself. Also, Michael B. Jordan is our main character in Creed. I feel like he does a really good job. He's an amazing actor, probably one of my favorite actors at the moment. But without our first movie, we obviously cannot have the whole series. This movie wouldn't be close to what it is, so I have to put it at our number 2 spot. Coming in at our number 1 spot, though, obviously it has to be Rocky. I mean, was there ever really any doubt? Without this movie, we don't have the rest of the series, we don't have the Creed movies, because this movie tells the best underdog story of all time. There's another movie called Dodgeball, the true underdog story. This movie should be called Rocky, the true underdog story, because this movie just shows the perfect underdog. I mean, it starts out with showing Rocky pretty much being in an underground boxing arena. He wins the fight, but he takes a lot of beatings. He's pretty much down on his luck in real life too. He's pretty much a loan shark, and he goes out for these gangsters and pretty much warns them like, hey, if you don't pay up, we're gonna come after you. And he meets Adrian, the love of his life in this movie. And this movie, at the end of the day, just shows how despite your background and despite your luck, hard work trumps it all. And Apollo offers a fight to this lowly fighter known as the Italian Stallion, but Rocky trains hard and he has the will to fight, and he makes Apollo go the full amount of rounds. And it, again, is a split decision, much like the first Creed movie. This movie also ends in a split decision, which leads us into Rocky 2, where he can win the championship. And this movie is the best movie where he's the easiest character to root for in all of cinema. He does a great job, Sylvester Stallone. So this is my number 1 spot, is the original Rocky. And that's all for this ranking, folks. Again, if you have your list, feel free to put it in the comments down below. If there's any other movie series you would like me to rank, again, put that in the comments down below. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. See ya.